Chaos is actually a state that allows for great creativity to be born, where we surrender to something bigger than ourselves and we let go of our control of life and release in the surrendering itself. And as we stay rooted and grounded, there's a different way that we can relate to chaos. One that's not necessarily out of control, but surrendered to that which is larger than us.
Hey everybody, it's Christine Marie Mason, your host for the Rose Woman podcast, where every week we offer something that might create a little bit more love or liberation or freedom or some opening in our beautiful body, mind, and spirit. So I'm starting a series, which will run intermittently, so it's not really a series, is it? On body joy. Well, it started out as body joy. Basically, how do you live through your whole life long, moving, enjoying your physical self? But as I began to interview people, joy isn't the only thing that comes up often. Sadness comes up, grief, all kinds of things come up when we start moving our bodies. So maybe I'll change it to body alive or something like that. But anyway, we're going to be talking with dancers, athletes like soccer players, people who started very young and have established very good habits, and people who didn't start a sport like surfing until they were in their 50s and found new freedom in that. So I moved a lot when I was little, 17 times, I think, before I graduated from high school. And I never really trained in any particular sport. My athleticism was playing outside, riding bikes, walking in nature, swimming in the lake, that kind of stuff. I think one summer I was on a softball team and maybe I went to summer camp, but I was really active. Like I loved to dance but untrained. And when I was in high school briefly, I was on the dance team and did some gymnastics. But I left home at 15 and a half and graduated high school at 16. And so there really wasn't any basis, even when I started college, to understand sport. In college, I was in the Jane Fonda era, and I started a bunch of aerobics programs at the college that I went to, writing routines, recording them on cassette tapes, handing them out to people, having those people then lead classes in the dormitories. That might have been my first real business, although I count a newspaper I started in the 6th grade as that. Well, anyway, back to this journey with fitness and movement. I got pregnant really young. I was taking a modern dance class my first year in college, and I met my husband the first day, and 2 years later we were married, and a year after that, less than a year, I had my first child. So by 22, I had 3 kids. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for movement and dance in those years. It was basically, the movement was school, diapers, feeding, playing, school, diapers, feeding, playing. But then we moved to a suburb, and I decided I really wanted to get super fit. And I started doing triathlons, and then taking some dance classes like salsa dancey kind of things now and then. And I picked up tennis. Now, I'd never played on a team. As I said, I never had that experience when I was younger. So I wanted to play on the tennis team after a little bit of practice and loving the feeling of smacking the ball and running around and the strategy. And the first time that I played doubles, it was so hard for me because every time I made a mistake, I would feel like I was really disappointing my partner so much. I couldn't have fun at it. I could only have fun with the singles until I sort of fixed my psychology and fixed my brain. So, I spent my 20s basically in this frenzied athletic situation. I found yoga when I was 32, and that has been my practice ever since. I'm doing a whole episode on that, so I'm not going to talk about that here. And I returned to the dance floor in my mid-40s. And I didn't go back to waltz, to do modern dance, to do anything that was really performative. I started in what's called an open floor dance. It's a morning dance where you are barefoot and you're wearing athletic clothes and you just move like you want to. And the feeling in that was the Sunday morning kind of dance church situation, men and women, 100 to 200 people on any given Sunday. And it felt like everybody was in there to both express their bodies, but to totally blow off steam. And at some point, there would be an organic, woo, kind of a real release in the room. And you could just feel like how much we as creatures, in order to be healthy, need to move, need to shake our cells, need to oxygenate, need to keep those limbs going, all of that, just how vital it was to being alive. Like, what would life be without dance? That's how I felt. As I was training in the yoga stuff, I also learned the physiology of things like frozen shoulder, where, if you don't move a joint, it calcifies, like little calcium deposits start to form in the parts that aren't used. So one of the things you can do to stay healthiest your whole life long is to move every joint in your body in its full range of motion every day. When I hit perimenopause and menopause, I don't know, my energy sort of went out of the fitness side. I was kind of feeling a little grumpy and gloomy for a while, and I put on some weight and just kind of got to a point where I wasn't as enthusiastic. And I got a lot of inflammation in my body. My joints started to hurt. And inflammation comes mostly from diet, too much sugar. Inflammation is mostly diet. I changed all of that. I changed it by going first to a place where I could relearn the kind of diet that would really help me live an optimal life. I went to Hippocrates Institute down in Florida. I did an interview with one of the founders of Hippocrates, Brian Clements, a couple of years ago, I think, but it was particularly on that men go through a kind of equivalent of menopause, also called andropause, and they also have a lot of the same things that come up, hormonal changes, muscle loss, lack of mental clarity, all kinds of things in their transitions. Anyway, the diet at Hippocrates was heavily raw, completely vegan, a few cooked things here and there, almost no sugar even, like no fruits twice a week, good fats, and lots of greens, a little tiny bit of nuts and seeds. But what I noticed is I didn't feel hungry there. It's just that the outside world didn't really allow to live that all the time. But it's a good baseline. And every time I switched to that diet for a week or 2 weeks, all the inflammation in my body goes away. My fingers get smaller, my joints get smaller, I don't have any swelling in my ankles. Overall I just feel, and I get so shiny, my eyes get so shiny. When you eat food that isn't difficult for the body to digest and process, it's just simple for it to get all the nutrients out and let it go through you, then it takes all of the extra energy that it was spending digesting and sends it to other parts of the body to do cellular repair and to clean things up. And so at the end of a few days of that, it's cleaned up behind your eyes and your eyes are shiny, and it's cleaned up your skin is shiny. And just this sort of the diet as the foundation of a healthy body is really about disease prevention and letting it function in an optimum way. So you've got the diet foundation, and then you've got moving the lymph. And every day moving the lymph, whether it's shaking, jumping up and down, whether it's doing a sport that's shaking, like running will move the lymph, but it needs to have impact. Rebounding on a trampoline will move the lymph. You can do lymph dry brushing. I sell a brush for that at rosewoman.com, a skin brush, which I use every day to move lymph. And I also use a thing called the power plate a couple of times a week, where you push a button and it shakes you. You kind of bend your knees and it shakes everything and it moves the lymph. And breathing, oxygenation, really deep breathing. If you don't have a yoga practice, then you're probably not familiar with pranayama, but pranayama is an ancient yogic technique for breathing. All kinds of techniques, actually. They think the breath can be medicine. The breath is the only element in the body where it runs by itself if you're not paying attention to it, but if you pay attention to it, you can use it and direct it to create changes in state and mood. So pranayama has been around for thousands of years as an intervention. There are pranayamas like really deep, rapid breathing to wake you up. There are pranayamas like slow breathing to calm the nervous system and calm anxiety. There are things to balance the right and left side of the brain. I mean, we could go through those, but it's probably not necessary at this moment. It's a very rich topic. A modern equivalent of pranayama is Wim Hof breathing. And Wim Hof is a really interesting cat. He's got an app called Wim Hof Method, and you can get guided breath work through that and meditations through that. He guides people in ice bathing, cold showers, those kinds of things, because cold therapy is also really great for the immune system. If you haven't done Wim Hof, there's a YouTube, you can Google Wim Hof basic breathing on YouTube and you'll find it. And that's a really great way to start. And just see how you feel, like tingly probably, and wide awake when it's done. The basic one I think is 11 minutes. So not a huge investment of your time. So now we have movement. We have, in this category, cardio, which everybody seems to know about, get your heart rate up. And it's not as much as we thought it was 30 years ago. You really only need your heart rate in sort of a 140 zone, like 70 to 80% zone, to maintain a basic level of fitness and general human health. You don't have to run all out, although it's fun and expands your capacity to move. And so do that 20, 30 minutes a day. No big deal. You're going to feel great. But all of that stuff, for me, going to the gym, doing weight-bearing exercises, doing all of this stuff that's for the immune system, for your general longevity, for your general health, look and feel great, is not the same as finding something where you lose all sense of time and you're just enjoying your body in its pure glee, in its capacity to move and turn. So I feel that coming down the mountain on a pair of skis. I feel that dancing on the dance floor. I don't feel that running. Running is for me, but a lot of people do. They get a meditative high from that. And in fact, we're going to talk to Dr. Susan Hardwick in this series, and she is a runner and talks about what that feels like for her. So the point is to find the thing that it is for you. And one phrase that stuck out from a conversation in this series with Lisa Betts-LaCroix is, you're never too old and it's never too late. You're never too old and it's never too late to start any kind of athletic practice. I'm going rock climbing today. Insane. I'm just going to try it and see if I like it. And if I like it, I'll go back. And if I don't really like it, I won't go back. But the experimentation is part of the joy. So the first guest in this series is dance. And it's Lucia Horan, and she is the lineage holder of the Gabriel Roth 5Rhythms dance community and teaches all over the world. I met her many, many years ago when I took a dance workshop at Esalen, and she will tell you all about this particular practice. It's like open floor, it's like ecstatic dance, but it has a little bit more structure and depth to it in terms of what the practice is designed for. So, without further ado, I would like you to meet Lucia Horan, a wisdom keeper, an amazing woman in many ways. I start by asking her how she began dancing.
That is an interesting question, which really brings us to the beginning of my life and my life story. And people often do ask me that question, and it's a very simple answer. My mother was a dancer, and she is part Persian, and she studied Middle Eastern dance and danced all the way through her pregnancy with me. So I was really dancing in vitro. And then when I was a child, I grew up in a culture with a lot of dance at Esalen Institute, where both my sister and I were born. I have a half brother, and his mother was the founder of the 5Rhythms. And so when people ask me, how did you find 5Rhythms? I also have kind of the same answer, that I was really born into the lineage of the 5Rhythms, in the sense that as children, we were all around her as she was developing her work. And so as kids, we were just around the dance. It was a part of our lives and very much embedded into our culture, our community, and our everyday experience. So it was very normalized for us. And then when I was around 12, I became very fascinated with Gabrielle's work. I had been dancing Middle Eastern and African and other cultural dances, but I was really drawn to study more with her. So when I was 12, my mom encouraged me to go and spend more time with her and really dance inside of her workshop spaces. So at 12, I started, and at 19, she empowered me as a teacher.
Tell people about Gabrielle. She's kind of an icon in the dance community. like the founder of ecstatic dance, basically, in some ways.
Yeah, so Gabrielle was really a mystic in her own right, and she was called, they called her the urban shaman, because ecstatic dance has been found in cultures since the beginning of time, and no matter how recently or how farther back into history, your people may have been colonized, dance and ecstatic dance has always been a part of life as humans. But in the modern society, in the last handful of generations, we've been divorced from our body, divorced from dance, and it's seen really just as a performance. And Gabrielle was the grandmother of ecstatic dance in the modern sense, because she was the first person to really begin to reweave into modern society the empowerment of dance, not as performance, but as a presence-based practice, and one in which we are working with a system of movement that allows us, in sobriety actually for the most part, to enter into a trance state or an ecstatic state. So she had a method for how to do that, like a mathematical equation. She developed a method, and the more one would study that method, then the easier it would become to access those states and then maintain connection with them as you entered in. So she was, all the way through her life, she developed a system which was really one that maps the human experience through movement. And so she created a series of maps which would help a person to navigate their internal and external worlds by understanding the primary energies, which she called the waves map, the energies of the heart, which she called heartbeat, the heartbeat map, the energies or the life cycles, she called the cycles map, and so on. So she had another map she called mirrors, which has to do with the soul versus the ego, a map called God, Sex, and the Body, which is pretty self-explanatory. And so she, unfortunately she died prematurely of cancer at 74. And so she still was working. She still had so many things she wanted to bring into the world. And yet she left us with so much. So I feel I would consider a lineage carrier of her work, and I've dedicated my life to carrying forth into the world this vocabulary of movement, which can help people become what I call better athletes, of a better emotional athlete of life. And I think that's such an important thing when we find ourselves lacking so much social and emotional intelligence in this day and age. And her work takes us out of the head and into the body, which is actually a much more direct and easier path for many people to access. So that's a little bit about her life and her work and what she did in the time she had here, and where we are as beneficiaries of that work.
I can remember being in my first 5 Rhythms class with you, and you were talking about the waves and to pay attention to which waves were difficult for you, because that mirrored what was difficult in your off the dance floor life. And, whether it was hard for you to enter or build steam and keep working or release at the top, it's so extensible. It's not just what happens on the dance floor.
So Gabrielle, she said, when she was developing her work, she started to track the way that energy moved in the world and also in the human body. And she was developing her work at Esalen Institute next to the waves and in this dynamic force of nature, which some people call God's altar. It's an incredibly powerful, powerful land if you haven't experienced it for yourself. And she saw the human tendency was to complicate everything. So as she began to describe the experience, it was coming into something that would simplify our ability to understand the dynamic forces of life and the dynamic energies of life. And she saw that we're working with all of this as energy. So essentially we could call it these map states of being, but we could also call them simply energy. So she said, energy moves in waves. Waves move in patterns. Patterns move in rhythms, and rhythms move in cycles. Energy, waves, patterns, rhythms, and cycles. Nothing more, nothing less. A dance. And that's what we are essentially, even though the ego tries to fix us into rigid ways of being, we are energy in movement. And so the foundation of the work is really beginning to understand that dynamic flexibility of the force of nature, which makes us up, but is also around us and in our interpersonal relationships. And she mapped, as she saw the wave beginning, the rhythm of flowing, which connects us to the feet, connects us to the inhalation. The very first movement that we take in life is an inhalation when we're born. It's the state of receptivity and attunement to oneself. From that place where we are attuning and filling with the resourcing energy in the flowing state, there's a point where we are full and something else happens. And that she marked as the second state, which she called staccato. And staccato is once we've filled, we enter a state of releasing or letting go, where we would find the connection to the exhalation and moving from the flowing earth feet into the staccato realm of the hips and the heart of fire. And that's this fire of our life that we deliver into the world, our passions, our dreams, our visions, our manifestations, our direction. And the power of staccato is the power of the yang energy. Yin is flowing, yang is staccato. So life asks us at some times to be very yin and to listen and attune inward. And then life also asks us to move out with our boundaries, our clarity, and deliver our passions into the world. And so she named that as a state of necessity, that there are times where we need to really be clear and execute our ideas, visions, and dreams. And then moving from the heart, hips, in this realm of staccato, she saw there was another energy which was born. And it is actually essentially born from the union of those two energies coming together of flowing and staccato. And there is a dissolving that happened, a sacred equation, where when you get the push and the pull of the circles of flowing and the lines of staccato, that they create a third energy, which she called chaos. Most people in Western society and who speak English relate to chaos as being synonymous with being out of control. But she saw that if you looked deeper and became more intimate with the realm of chaos, is actually a state that allows for great creativity to be born, where we surrender to something bigger than ourselves and we let go of our control of life and release in the surrendering itself. And as we stay rooted and grounded, there's a different way that we can relate to chaos. One that's not necessarily out of control, but surrendered to that which is larger than us. And that there is naturally in life a phase or a state where that energy just comes into us, whether we choose it or not. And it can be creative and it can be destructive. It can be a pandemic changing the world and changing the grounds of who we are and how we believe our life to be. It can be death. It can be birth. It can be any great change that happens that's larger than our individual life. And that dynamic force that breaks everything open actually cracks the rigid, hard shell and allows something new to be born. And that is very important to recognize, that we actually need chaos to push us to the edge and crack everything open so that something else can happen. And we let go of what no longer serves us. We let go of what's been constraining us or holding us back. And so from chaos, from the release of chaos, there is a fourth energy which is born, or fourth state of being, which is really the result of chaos. Because of what we've lived through, we are different, whether it was divorce or death or a job change or a child being born or the shift which has come from the deeper understanding of our cultural interconnection after a pandemic. We see we are different, we are changed, we are altered. And that is the state which she called lyrical, a result of the chaos, where we let go of what doesn't serve us and something else arises. And lyrical represents the part of us that's constantly in motion. It's the anicca, it's the ever-changing, impermanent state. And many of us relate to change from a position of a lot of clinging, of holding on and or pushing away, wanting it to be one way or another. And as we dance in relationship to the lyrical state, we start to develop a more agile relationship with the change and become fascinated by it rather than resistant to it, knowing that we're going to continue to change until the day we die. If we hold on to ourselves as fixed beings, our beauty we let go of, our body we let go of, our children we let go of. So it's constantly teaching us this state of being and falling in love and being in grace with the lyrical state of change and the evolution. So it frees us and liberates us to actually have the perspective of being open to the change and maybe even loving it. So that's a different way, and for many people, a different perspective into relating to change. And then when everything has shifted and everything has changed, then we're brought into yet another state. And she said it's not all over there. We actually are then brought to a fifth state, and that state is the integration of the change, where she called that stillness, where we don't end, it's all over in that final moment abruptly, but there's a whole process of integration which is required for one to fully embody the shifts and transformations that we've been through based on what we've survived, lived through, and experienced in life. And that stillness, it represents as well the deep emptiness, and not as a vast void that inhales us or sucks us or swallows us in, but the emptiness that connects all things. The beautiful understanding of interconnection, of giving and receiving, and it's that the place of death and rebirth. So stillness is yet another state that we look to become agile with in ourselves and also in each other. So that gives you a sense of moving through each of the rhythms: flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness. And when we arrive into stillness after the dance or that wave of movement, often we've externalized energy we no longer needed to hold, and we've integrated energies or experiences that needed to be integrated.
That's a very beautiful and comprehensive, both philosophical and felt explanation of these 5 parts of the wave. When someone's doing this practice, do you lead them in a practical sense? Are they doing it for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours? What's the length of a wave if someone is going to start and try to do something like this, dance like this?
Essentially, there is no time. There is only the time that is required, or the time that one has to intuitively follow how energy is moving and shifting and changing. So the practice can be done in 5 minutes in silence with only the breath, or the practice can be done over 2 hours, where you might be led through multiple waves, where you would dance multiple times each of the rhythms, and each time find something different. So it's really applicable. I mean, one of the things that I love about the practice is it's so accessible. You don't have to be a dancer. You don't have to have any dance experience. In fact, you don't even have to be able to walk. I've taught people in wheelchairs with one arm or one leg. I mean, I've taught people with COVID and cancer. Like, we show up with the capacity that we have and with the amount of time we have. And the amazing thing to me that's so inspiring is to see people in just a few minutes of contact with conscious connection and what I call the sacred trinity, or the sacred union of breath, movement, and spirit, come out of the suffering mind, the chattering mind, and transform very quickly that mind, chattering mind, into the mind of embodied presence. And that doesn't require a lot of time, and it doesn't require being wholehearted or whole-bodied for that matter. All it requires is showing up with what you have in the amount of time you have it, and applying those few moments, unabashed moments, with focused and undivided attention. And that's all you need.
We sometimes have dance breaks in the office. Anyone can call one. You just say, hey, put a song on, dance break. And it's magical. We did it at home too, dance party. And it changes the state and the space right away, helps you shake off energy, have self-contact. But I love that you're speaking to, there's no way you have to show up, but as you are. Back to where dance landed in a performative aspect in the culture, there seems to be a belief that you have to, quote unquote, know how to dance in order to dance in front of other people or even for yourself. So let's break down that concept. If someone's feeling that they have anxious or lack of confidence about their ability, and you notice that when you're leading a room, how do you invite them in? What are the recommendations for people to just drop into the body and dance if there's been resistance or they've gotten bad messages about their capacities?
So one of the things that I hold in deep reverence for myself and for all the participants who come to work with me is the aspect of our mind, which is protective. And that protective layering of mind or conditioning of mind that appears in behaviors which are self-conscious or reserved, are really there to guard us from being hurt. So if we can approach the practice in an inclusive way and allow for everyone to be where they need to be in the room to feel safe, then we can all be in the room at whatever level of interaction or involvement or engagement that feels safe and appropriate. So my work is trauma informed. I'm not a trauma professional, but I've spent a lot of time studying trauma and how it appears and how it works in our lives. I'm trained in David Treleaven's work, which is trauma sensitive mindfulness. And I use that as a lens in all of my rooms. And the reason I do that and how that's changed my work is that exactly what you're saying, when someone comes into the room who has a trauma background or a highly traumatized background, and they need to be by the door for the whole time and just feel their feet in the beat and move very gently, they are invited to do exactly that. And they're not being pushed into the center of the room to involve or engage with the room in a way that doesn't feel safe to them. And then someone else who might be on a different end of that spectrum that's ready to engage fully, that wants to dance in the center of the room and wants to move with other people and feels safe doing so, has the opportunity to do that. So my approach is, no matter where someone is in relationship to their body, feeling comfortable or safe in their body or in a room of other bodies moving, that it's very important to give permission for everyone to continue to find where they feel most safe, and also know that at any time they can take a break, they can titrate, they can use one of the 5 shields and practice being present and being within their window of tolerance without pushing that edge in over-activating or dysregulating them. So I hope that's a clear answer to the question that you asked about what do you do with all the difficult things that arise in our experience as we come into moving in our own bodies and moving in a group of other people's bodies. So it's not always so straightforward. And when we're in a group, often a lot is triggered. So then you have to use that. And that's all a part of the practice, which is beautiful and confronting and also offers the possibility of transformation and healing.
I mean, I love that you started with respect your adaptation, basically. If you've got this limit, respect its intelligence and then do what you can. Like this idea, I'm dancing. I'm just moving back and forth. I'm already dancing. I'm just moving my arm, and then letting it expand from there, because it is the self-contact and authenticity that will heal. So it's beautiful.
And that's I'll just add one thing to that, which is to start where you are and know that it's enough. And that one of the things that really trips people up is actually just the word dance. Because there is a lot of it is loaded for many people, or there's a history there of woundedness. And so I like to think of this work, even though it is a moving meditation, it is a dance practice. I like to think of it as movement. I mean, we're moving from the moment we're born until the last moment of our life, and we pass away. So, we're not afraid of moving. but we are afraid of dancing. So sometimes if we just deconstruct that word a little bit, it's quite helpful for people to let go of any limiting ideas and then engage.
So the waves map is this energy map feels like it's the foundational practice. And then there are these other layers and sort of more advanced practices. You said the second one was the heartbeat map. And I just wonder if we could touch on that one briefly, if you could describe it. At what point do you introduce it? Or is it in addition to the waves map in a session? Or is it danced as a separate practice? How do the different maps fit together?
Waves is the foundation of all of Gabrielle's maps. And it is the introductory experience that one would have in coming in to work with the 5 Rhythms as a system or a philosophy or method. And it's really important that one establishes a ground of safety and a relationship to one's body by using the waves map itself. So that really establishes a language and a repertoire of practice. Once that's established in a person's body, then we would move into the heartbeat map. So you could see it as waves being level 1, our foundation, and heartbeat being level 2. Now, normally when we're living in a very sedentary life, we can repress a lot. But the moment you start to move, often people start to feel. And so we move first in waves, the waves work. And the second you start to move, you move the feet and the heart moves. Stuck feet, stuck heart, stuck feet, stuck mind, move fluid feet, fluid heart, mind. So we really see the relationship between the release or the unhinging of the heart and whatever's been repressed coming through the foundational work. So the second you start to engage with movement, you're going to start feeling. But once that first relationship to the waves work is established, then there's a repertoire and an understanding and a language that we can then begin to work with in the emotional content, which is really social and emotional intelligence of the 5 Rhythms is one that brings us into the 5 emotional states and into working with their counterparts. So in the most basic terms, I'll give you to start with, flowing, which is the yin energy which comes in, relates us to the emotional quality of fear. Fear enters us. It comes into us. And in response to fear, we also have an opportunity to then experience courage. Without fear, we would never have the opportunity to be courageous, to be brave, and meet our fears. In staccato, the second rhythm, we come into confrontation with the externalizing, which is the anger aspect of the heart. And when something has come in to us and we've experienced fear, often what comes out is the anger on the other side. And anger puts us in direct relationship with forgiveness or what's needed to forgive. And now that's a very, very tall order, and there's a lot to say about that. But I do believe there's a stepping stone between anger and forgiveness, which is the stone which I call acceptance. And so we work in staccato with a relationship to anger and acceptance and forgiveness. We couldn't experience forgiveness if we hadn't experienced anger. And I can't imagine a life where I wasn't forgiven and where I wasn't giving forgiveness to those that I love. So, in staccato, we're dancing in that realm. When we've been afraid, when we've been hurt, and we've been angry, that also brings us then into direct relationship with the emotion of grief. And grief is in the realm of chaos. And chaos is the waters of the body. Grief comes in the tears. And we have an opportunity to see how we are formed and shaped by our fear, by our anger, and by our grief, to see the unshed tears that weigh us down, and then come into the movement so that grief has a way to cycle through us and be released from the heart, from the mind, and from the body. Like carrying gallons of water of unshed tears, our unexpressed sorrows create a level of deep heaviness in the way that we walk, in every step that we take. Once we're able to start to release and empty and free ourselves from that weightedness and the fullness of that, we actually open space in the heart, body, mind, and spirit for joy to enter. And joy doesn't come in all at once. Relates to the rhythm of lyrical, which is the rhythm of transformation. But it is the spaciousness that comes in the aftermath of chaos that allows for joy to come into our lives. And I like to say that in relationship with joy, because especially if you're somebody listening to this right now and joy is really far away and you've been in a lot of grief, it starts first with an appreciation. Because when we're in the deepest level of grief or trauma that we've survived, we don't have a lot of appreciation. It might start with just noticing something beautiful, like the sun is out today or a flower is blooming today. And that appreciation eventually turns into some sense of gratitude for being alive, for surviving. And then that gratitude eventually shifts into some sense of a lightness or a joyfulness. And it's through emptying the grief that we find that lightness. And in lyrical, then we have moved into the shift. And when joy really comes, or love really comes, it absolutely transforms us. It transforms our whole being, We become so accessible. Grief is inaccessible. Grieving people are very private, but joyful people are very open, very interested, very easy to make contact and eye contact and conversation with. From the opening of joy, then we're brought into our fifth rhythm, and our fifth rhythm is stillness, as you know, and that brings us into our relationship with the emotion of compassion. So joy opens and compassion connects. In compassion, we're able to connect because we've danced through the depths and measures of our own fear, anger, and sorrows, and joys as well. Then we're actually also able in compassion to then feel not only our own, but compassionately connect to those who also are in fear or surviving their own anger or their own grief, or trying to find some semblance of joy or invest in mudita so that they can be happier people. And so the cultivation of compassion is none of these are easy, but yet the body has this incredible direct path through, as we push the body into these shapes and create these gestures, we actually open the possibility, and working with neuroplasticity and working with the neural pathways for the heart mind to actually respond to the cultivation and connection to these emotions and to transforming the emotions, and also coming into a state of appreciation for how the emotions serve us. In that note, I'd like to say, we're in the heartbeat work, we're working with understanding the difference and creating a delineation between what the mind does with the emotion versus what the body does with the emotions. My job is to bring people into their body. Fear's job, and it's a sacred job, is here to protect and flowing. Staccato's sacred nature and sacred task and sacred job is here to defend. Doesn't always work, but that's the job it's here to do. Grief's job in its sacred nature is here to release us, to empty us. Joy's sacred nature is here to open, and compassion's is here to connect us. So that gives you the full spectrum of what one might experience in the fluidity of the heart through movement, and help us externalize what we no longer need in all these realms and integrate what needs to be integrated, which I see the word integration as healing. So integrate and heal what needs to be healed from the past so that we can live fully in the present. And that's what we're really getting at in the basis of all this, is how do I live more fully in the present? We got to do our work. So part of that is working with the heart through the body.
Trevor Hall has a song called In and Through the Body. Very apropos of this conversation that keeps kind of running in my head in the background. So yeah, I did a lot of reading, somatic intelligence stuff that was also often going on down at Esalen, like Peter Levine and, the whole birth of somatics. And it sounds to me like she got at somatic therapy through dance and through paying deep attention, before it entered sort of therapeutic modality in psychiatry and psychology?
Well, Gabrielle, she felt that her work was the gestalt of movement. So at the time where she was developing her work at Esalen, somatic therapy was being born. And she was a part of the cohort of teachers like Stanislav Grof, Ida Rolf, Peter Levine, the people that were really birthing, and of course, Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy. And her story goes all the way to working with Fritz Perls. And it was before somatics, therapy was approached from top down. It was only through the head, through working with the stories themselves. And what Esalen did in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s was birth a revolution in the healing modality, which included the body and didn't leave out the body. And part of her journey was seeing how people were shaped by their life experience, the grief of losing a child, blowing a hole through the chest, or the anger of one's jaw being so tight from, the repression or suppression or injustices that they had experienced that they couldn't even open their jaw. And that the body itself was holding this whole language of experience. So Ida Rolf said the issues are in the tissues. And Gabrielle said, great, let's identify where the issues are in the tissues and then work with the gestalt of movement. Gestalt is the word meaning process, and that was Fritz Perls' body of work, was to come into the body, listen, and then let it reveal the story as it unwinds and follow that energy until it comes into completion. So she was also following the energy through movement. Though she wasn't a therapist, her work has become recognized as incredibly therapeutic and is often used by therapists as a complement to the somatic therapy that they're doing with clients.
Yeah, I was focusing in this on embodied joy and like really living in your joy, but I'm reminded that when I start to move, I experience everything. So maybe we should change the whole name of the series to Embodying Your Reality or something. I'd love to take some time, to talk a little bit more about how you've moved into working with women's groups and sort of what that trajectory has looked like. You have a young daughter. You've become a mother. You're hitting a sort of a new stage of your own life. Would you share with us how your women's work has evolved? How that was born?
I was inspired to work with women because there is much of my own work which has been done and much of my own healing which has been done in circles of women. And there were conversations which I felt like could only happen within a circle of those who identify as women. They're not always born in the body of a woman, but those who identify as is very important for me to open up that circle and feel like, wow, when we come together as women, conversations are had, there are relevant stories that are shared. And I began to work with women about 10 years ago. And the first group I ran, I looked around the room and I was struck at how loaded the room was. Our relationship with our own bodies, our spirituality, our sexuality, our rites of passage or lack thereof rites of passage, the support and acknowledgement that we need when we're forced to live in a patriarchal society, and how often we betray our own truths to accommodate everyone else, especially the men in the world around us, to kind of fit into a man's world. And then on top of that, we have these very loaded relationships between sisters, mothers, or friends and children. And so there's just so much to work with. And I really could see that there was something that would happen when I would bring women together to work in a circle where the things that are too big for us to hold alone can be held together. And there's something very sacred about just being in that circle of women that allows for the openness, the safety and spaciousness for us to really do that work. And so it launched me into this journey of working with women and providing spaces where women can come together and share and heal and cry and talk about all the things that are really personal to the experience of being here in a woman's body.
So how did that manifest? Did it turn into monthly meetings, or does it have its own sort of rhythm, or?
Because women have been doing this for thousands of years, there's a term which is used, and it's actually used universally. And that's one of the reasons why I liked the term, because it's not borrowing from anyone's culture or taking anything that's not rightfully ours. That term is Moon Lodge, and Moon Lodge across all societies is a place where women gathered in a circle to do healing work. And so I started to call the groups Moon Lodge, honoring the sacred feminine. And after a few years of doing the work in retreats, where I was teaching weekends and week-long retreats, doing mindfulness, trauma-sensitive mindfulness, insight, 5 Rhythms, then I encountered a really incredible woman who I wanted to teach with, which is Dr. Julie Vaughn. And she is a holistic doctor and a doctor of acupuncture. And she's bringing a very different set of skill set into the room than I have myself. And I found to be very complementary. And during the pandemic, we had extended the programs to go into longer 5-day and week-long programs. And then during the pandemic, we started running online programs where we have monthly meetups. And then we do 6-week training groups where there's a classroom session once a week, and then an engagement session, which is the process side of the experience. And then after the 6-week program ends, we run an ongoing monthly group, which is women from all over the world and women of every age. And one of the things that I've really been confronted with is the myth busting around what is Moon Lodge, because I found I had to keep answering the same question over and over around Moon Lodge that women would ask me of, oh, this is for women who are in fertility years, they're, fertile years. And I have to kept coming back to reminding everybody, the Moon Lodge work, honoring the sacred feminine, is for women of every age and every stage of life. And that it's actually within that circle, it makes it even more powerful when you have very young women all the way through into women who are in their elder years and their wisdom years, their crone years. They're holding the space and holding the circle and sharing in the sacred wisdom, because the collective wisdom that's in a room is so vast when we have a large group of women of every age. So that's kind of how the work has manifested. And then on an additional aspect of Moon Lodge, which is now an additional piece of our work that we're doing, is not only Moon Lodge, but it actually has we have 2 sets of the way that the work looks. And the one is for women of all ages. And then we have women who are just working with fertility. So women who are in their fertile ages, who want to conceive or are having trouble conceiving. Women's empowerment work is on the forefront of a very relevant conversation in our time. But fertility is also in a very interesting and precipice culturally and socially right now, where we're taking the cloak of shame off of ourselves as women, especially for people who are wanting to conceive or having trouble conceiving or have been through trauma of medical treatments. So there's the second group, which we call spiritual fertility, which is for women who are in that part of their journey to have support. And the medical system is one that is, it's this allopathic system, which is treating you, but there's no acknowledgement of the spiritual side of conception. And so when we work with spiritual fertility, we're returning to the awe and to the love and to the inspiration and the magic and how to cultivate, manifest, and bring balance, because a lot of people are really exhausted, burnt out, and have lost hope. So how do we return to the magic through the practices of self-care, of movement, of massage, of acupuncture, of rituals, of dance, of prayer, and those things that allopathic medicine just doesn't touch. And it has its place, and we are so grateful for it. But there is a big void for many women in their spiritual journey who need the spiritual side of fertility to be addressed. And that's the other aspect of the work that we're doing.
Those are big, important movements. I remember at the end of your last retreat, do you remember sitting and listening to Rumi poetry?
Of course.
there's an older woman, I mean, a real elder, 100 years old or something.
Penny Vergay. So, yeah, she's 93 years old. Her name is Penny Vergay. She's one of the elders of our community here. She was one of my very first teachers when I was a child, and she recited Hafiz.
So to paint a portrait for the people for people in the room, this woman is sitting at the front of the room, and she's reclining in sort of silk pajamas on cushions, and behind her is the beautiful trees of Big Sur and the ocean out the window, and there's a violinist to her one side and a woman on her other side playing, I think, bowls, right? And she's reading, and the light begins to stream in and hits her head, and they all turn golden, and she would kind of doze off and then come fully alive and recite Hafiz from memory. And I looked at her, and she was so glowing from the inside. And everyone in the room, including my daughter who was sitting next to me, was like, that's what I want to be like when I'm 90. You know, that free and that alive.
Yes. That was a very memorable experience, and one which they offer in the community. And they have the group of 3 individuals who they're called overlapping halos. But Penny, she's called Damaris, and her Sufi name is Damaris, but her name here in our community is Penny Vergay. And she, many people face the challenge of feeling irrelevant as they move into their elder years, or feeling unseen in their elder years. And within our community, one of the amazing things about what and who Penny is, or Damaris, as she's called in her Sufi community, is that she is so relevant and so seen and so acknowledged for the living historical being that she is within the community. And to see someone at 93 years old with that much spark in her spirit and in her mind, that for over an hour could recite Hafiz from embodied memory. And as the sun set and that golden light touched her, she entered into an ecstatic state, with the violin playing and the bowls playing, and she would drop in, as you said, to almost a sleeping state, which is to enter into a very deep attunement with her own being. And then from that place, this bubbling out of this incredible poetry. And I love that you brought that up, because her aliveness is a reminder for all of us that no matter where we are as women in this world, we are never irrelevant. We should be honored and seen. And if you're not in your own community, then find a place that will honor you, and that's one of the things that for me in my communities, come to my community if you don't feel seen and honored, because one of the things that you will remember coming into my groups is that there is not one group where I don't acknowledge the wisdom of those who identify as elders in my room. It's so important to me. I've spent so much of my 46 years on this planet having the honor of sitting at the feet of great wisdom, and I am who I am today because of that. So there is not one room that I'm in where I don't feel that.
I feel that in you so much, and this acknowledgement, we call it like, I am a pulse in the mind of creation. I'm arising as a continuation of lineage, and I'm arising as a precursor to something else. I'm not isolated. I live in this like as a thread in the weaving of over time, and I felt that so palpably from you, and it caused me also to just to look at that again, like, where are the elders in my community that might enjoy a little bit more upliftment, attention, sparkle, shine. So we can take that as a practice as well. It's been an hour, and I'm shocked because I still have 100 questions for you. But you're just so lovely. Look in the show notes. I'll put all the links to these places, to where you can find this practice, where you can find courses if you want to come out and take a workshop. But if you can't do any of that, then put on some music, drop into your body, and just start moving, and see what awakens in you. Thank you so much Any final words? If you had a wish for all the women of the world, what would it be?
I want to say that whatever you believe in and whatever it is that makes you feel most free, that's what you should go and do. Whatever it is that makes you feel free, follow it. And I would love to end with a very short poem by Rainer Rilke, who it says, go to the limits of your longing. God speaks to each of us as he makes us, then walks us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me, flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror, just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Go to the limits of your longing and be free.
Thank you for joining me today on the Rose Woman Podcast. I'm Christine Marie Mason. If you like this episode, please send it to someone who might benefit. It helps me get the word out, and that plus ratings is really the only way to grow the podcast. Recommendations and ratings. If you enjoyed the content in the beginning on detoxing the body, a lot of that information is contained in a book I wrote called The Invitation, Daily Intimate Self-Care, which is primarily for women, but it's also for men who are curious about how women's bodies work, shows all the anatomical parts of our intimate parts, and then talks about cycles and talks about detoxing and supplements and how the health of the pelvic basin and all of the organs of reproduction and sexuality sit within the overall health of the body. So take a look at that at rosewoman.com, The Invitation. I also wrote a book called The 9 Gifts, First Aid for Mind, Body, and Spirit, sort of ways to hack your state of mind and being and feeling tone and to create more play. That's also at rosewoman.com. So if you want to chit chat, come over to Instagram. I'm at the.rose.woman, or you can find the company, Rosebud Woman, at Rosebud Woman on the same platforms. Please be happy, be well, take care of your beautiful embodiment. See you next time.